Hi guys, I'm back. I know we had to abruptly end the timeline discussion earlier today because I had a client scheduled. My client subsequently rescheduled, but that's okay. It's given me some time to record this so I can add it to my channel a bit later today. For those of you who don't need the scene to be set as much and want a briefer kind of overview of the points I was making and also a continuation from the earlier video, feel free to watch this one. I'm going to try and keep rambling to a minimum and just focus on the key points that I'm making. I don't want the key points to be lost because I think when I presented it all in the 40 plus slides earlier today, that's got all of the detail and it sort of fleshes everything out. And I think that can be useful, but I think just getting to the meat and bones is probably the most important thing for a lot of people, at least in the early stages of understanding, the points I'm trying to make. At least that's how my brain works. So let's launch in. So this is just the proposed timeline and why I think Richard Allen is not Bridge Guy, or a timeline that shows Richard Allen is not Bridge Guy. So just a note, while my timeline does have similarities with the state's timeline, my interpretations are 100% different. I don't believe Richard Allen is guilty. I don't believe he's Bridge Guy. And my proposed timeline is not in any way inculpatory. So I know this is a misconception when I say Rick arrived at 1, or Rick did see the 4 girls, or even if I say, Rick parked at the CPS, then it sounds like I'm suggesting I agree with the state, but I'm not. I'm actually just trying to make sense of information and finding other ways to interpret that information I think is actually incredibly important. There is more than one interpretation to the timeline information, and just because the overall kind of times might marry up with what the state says, the interpretations absolutely do not. So anyone who follows me in any way will know that I started off on the fence, unsure about Rick's guilt when I watched the trial. It was only once the interrogation videos came out that I started to really 100% lean to not guilty. And then it was subsequently from further deep diving into information just like this timeline that I was able to come to a position of believing that Rick Allen is innocent, and really feel a need to advocate for Rick Allen, along with so many other people out here on social media who feel that this is a terrible injustice. So I'm 100% behind Rick Allen. I spend a lot of my free time doing this because I want to support an innocent man, and I want true justice for Abby and Libby, because I don't believe justice has been served at this point. Okay, so without further ado, I've got the regular disclaimer. I'm not going to read through it because that's boring. You can read it. As you know, these are just my opinions, and I am not involved directly in the case, and I'm not law enforcement or a legal expert. So in the longer version earlier today of the timeline discussion, I presented this map of the trails. I think this is super important. So anyone who wants to understand the timeline needs to understand the layout of the trails. I don't know that the jury were actually even shown something like this. I haven't come across anything that suggests they have. The fact that I've had to make this myself suggests that there aren't a lot of versions of this out there on the internet. So this has been something that I've worked on for months now. It started with just sketches in one of my children's scrapbooks, and now I've managed to get it on Canva, make it a bit colorful and interesting. It is not to scale. There are parts of it that are not, 100% what it would look like if we were looking over this area on a map. For example, this highway and the nature preserve are not going to interact at all, but it gives you the overall sense of where people were walking, where people were at on that day, and where people sighted each other. So I think this is a really good reference. Absolutely happy if anyone wants to correct it, if I've got any of the timings or locations or names wrong. The estimations of the times have come from watching YouTube videos of people walking through the trails. I really recommend that to people if you're wanting to understand the trails. It's come from asking locals, and then kind of coming up with some approximations. Everything is an approximation. Of course, we all walk at different speeds. So, yeah, the main point that I'm still unsure about is this 505 nature preserve. So I've had reliable people tell me that this is actually only about 6 minutes as a loop. I've had other people say it's 15 minutes, and I've had other people say it's longer. So I'm basing this on some of the videos that I watched where I saw people would walk down about 6 or 7 minutes, and then it gets to kind of more brushy area to get right down to the creek bed. So if you go all the way to the creek bed, my estimation is it would take 15 to 20 minutes. If you went halfway and back, it'd probably be like 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so that's the trails. That's how, that's the paths of all of the main people on the trails that day. I have heard people say that there are other paths, you know, that loop off around all of these different areas. None of the witness testimonies are suggestive that they did do that, other than the 4 girls who said they went down here to the water's edge, and that figures in my timeline later. I could have probably popped that there, but it's not an official pathway, but that is something that they stated in their testimony that they did. They went down to the water's edge, and they didn't go down here like I initially thought. They went down here to the water. Okay, so that's the trails. Let's also just quickly look at the 505 bench. So again, more detail in the longer videos. The 505 bench, I think, is just so relevant to this case. This is where Rick Allen sat, according to his statement. Now, this is this bench here. And again, I probably should have labeled it on here, but this is the 505 bench, right? And so what you'll notice here is this distance from here to here. So this is the trail split, the fork, where we have the Abby and Libby Memorial now. This is to the Monon High Bridge, the 501, the 505, and this is Mears Farm entrance. This is about 10 to 15 seconds walk from there, and there's some trees around here. So as you can see, it looks quite far, right? This is looking as you're walking from the Mears towards the trail split. It's about 15 seconds walk, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is still a fair enough distance that you wouldn't really, when you're sitting there, hear a lot of what was going on here, unless it was loud, and the people walking past may not notice this person sitting here either. So this is a really, really key point in the case, because Rick Allen himself says he sits on the bench overlooking the water. This is that bench. So this is where the really contentious stuff starts. So what I've done here is tried to map out the timelines of the 3 main kind of groups. And I call Rick Allen and Betsy Blair groups because I don't know how else to really describe, the comparison. But they're the 3 sort of sets of people on the trails between 12 and 2, other than Abby and Libby and Bridge Guy. I haven't actually put their timelines in here because I believe that anyone who's deep diving into this case and come across my video looking at the timelines already knows the brief timelines for Abby and Libby and Bridge Guy. I'll speak to them anyway as we go through this, but I can add that slide later. I have added that slide to the main presentation. So the reason this is contentious is because people have varied opinions about Rick. Mostly, but also there's some shifts in terms of timelines for the girls and Betsy Blair based on other people's mapping out of what they said and what their testimony was. Betsy Blair's description of loops seems really confusing. It's really hard to marry up the 3 loops with the timing. Again, I go into more detail about that on the longer live video earlier today, so refer to that if you'd like a little bit more information. The key point here, though, is that we now have these people, the 4 girls and Betsy Blair, on the trails at the same time and not seeing each other. And the reason they don't see each other, according to my hypothesized timeline, is that Betsy Blair is on the 505 loop when the girls would cross paths with her. So, for example, as the girls, the four girls, I'm looking at 505, the four girls are walking this way, headed to the Monon High Bridge, where they have a photo at about 12:43. The reason that they wouldn't cross paths with Betsy Blair is she's come in, she's gone there, and she's gone down here and is coming back up. So she would be here, and that would be the only way that the girls could enter towards the Monon High Bridge, because they're here at 12:25, they're here at 12:43, and not past Betsy Blair. Now, the other alternative is they do pass Betsy Blair, and she's one of the people. They say they saw other people on the trails that day. But the issue that I have with that is that then that means that Betsy Blair also forgets seeing the girls, because Betsy Blair says for her first two loops around here, between 12 and 1:15, she doesn't see anybody. Now, is that possible that she just didn't register? Sure, but this is 4 teenage girls. That's a fairly large group to not register if you walk directly in front of them. So if you look at the paths on the trails, they're not super wide paths. There aren't lots of people there. And so as a result, it'd be hard to reconcile how she missed the group of 4 people that she passed in that time frame. So that explains those 2 groups being on the trails at the same time and not seeing each other. If we try to add Rick into that, it becomes too difficult, because then we've got Rick then potentially being around here at that same time. So how does this third group, and I say quote unquote group, it's just one person, not see the girls or Betsy Blair and they don't see him? This is why I'm more prone to sticking to this timeline. Now, the reason I wanted to present this timeline is as a direct challenge to the people who believe Rick Allen's guilty. So if we look at Tom Webster and Gray Hughes and, of course, the state's timeline, they all provide a fairly what seems like a compelling timeline that suggests that Rick Allen can only be Bridge Guy. And, I think that draws a lot of people in. I think a lot of people, myself included, I remember watching Tom Webster's video, and all credit to him. The way that he sort of stepped through it felt believable. And it's only once you really scrutinize it in more detail that you see that there is a possible way for Richard Allen to be on the trails that day and not seen by anyone. So that, though, is not a timeline starting anywhere in this period where Betsy Blair's doing her first 2 loops. So instead, what I've suggested is that Rick Allen arrives around the 1 o'clock mark. This is consistent with what he rang into the police in the days after the murders. And as such, it's not something completely out of left field. Yes, I know that later, when he's interviewed in 2022, which is 5 years later, he suggests a different timeline, but I can explain that with memory research. So we're going to look at that in a minute. So let's just look at the timeline. So if he arrived at about 1-ish, and he parked either at the CPS or the Old Camden Road area that he discussed in the interview with police in October 2022, I'm not going to debate where he parked at the moment. That can be a debate for another day. But wherever he parked, it would mean that he'd be around the trailhead at about 1:10 to 1:20-ish, and then walking towards the trail split. Now, you can see then he's about 5 minutes behind Betsy Blair, potentially. And so Betsy Blair would have been ahead. She's gone back to her car, and she's left by the time Rick arrives at the trail split. But what we do know is that Rick says he sees 3 girls. Now, he says he sees 3 girls who look like they're going off the trails back to where the cars were parked. He does call it the trailhead, but I believe he's referring to the trail split. A lot of people refer to the trail split as the trailhead, and that's here. And I think part of that reason is that this area here is newer. The Freedom Bridge, I believe, was put in, was it around 2014, I believe. I found a video on YouTube of where they're actually putting the bridge in, popping the bridge in. Sounds a bit funny. So this was a newer area, this trailhead here. So I wonder if existing people saw this as the main trailhead. It makes sense because this is where we've got the fork to the 2 to the two main kind of routes of the trail. So we hear Kelsey German refer to this as a trailhead parking lot as well, or parking area. So I think that this is what he's referring to, because if he says he walks, like he directly crosses paths with the girls. Now, if he's crossing paths with the girls here, then that means that he's walking this way and they're walking this way. That's not where the parked cars were. He said wherever he parked, whether it's here or here, there were no parked cars. There was no big car park around here that he could have seen. He's always consistently referring to cars parked here at the Mears Farm entrance. So basically, that means he probably crossed paths around here. Now, this works well with this timeline because that would lead him to be crossing paths with the girls around 1:20. And we know that the girls are back here at the benches at 1:26. So they probably were walking back that way around that time. How do we explain him the girls not seeing him? How do we explain him only seeing 3 of the 4 girls? We're going to get to that, but let's just use our kind of just general sort of sense of memory and attention. 4 girls are chatting, they're on Snapchat, they're joking around, they're taking photos, versus 1 man walking quietly. You can see how a group could miss the 1 man, but the 1 man probably wouldn't miss the group. Similar kind of explanation for how I say I don't feel Betsy Blair could have reliably missed the 4 girls. So basically all of this leads up to Rick then going on to the 505 bench and then walking back to the trailhead at about 10 to 2 and back to his car and leaving by about 2 o'clock. So then the next point of contention here is, how does Rick not see Bridge Guy walk past, who probably walks past at some point before he leaves the 505 bench? And how does he not see Betsy Blair re-enter? Because Rick says he sees 2 cars parked at the Mears lot when he's leaving. So that's around this time, which is the only time in that sort of time frame where there are 2 cars in the Mears lot, Betsy Blair and Kelsey German. We know that Betsy Blair arrives at the Mears parking lot literally minutes before Kelsey German, and yet they don't see each other. And so my suggestion here is that Betsy Blair parks, hops out and starts walking, and Kelsey's car pulls in. And this is when Rick gets up, turns around, sees the 2 cars and heads back. Now, we're going to look at these few minutes in a bit more detail in a couple of slides' time. But this would explain how he sees the 2 cars. He doesn't see Abby and Libby. He doesn't see Betsy Blair, because Betsy Blair potentially has already walked the 30 seconds up to the trail split and turned towards the 501 when he gets up. And the girls are likely still hovering around the car, getting the jumper out of the back seat. And they're far enough away that he wouldn't be able to fully perceive the girls specifically. He does mention there could have been people around the car. And realistically, again, if you go and I've done a little bit of my own little field research, obviously not anything that's standardized research, but I've literally gone 30 seconds from, the entrance to a trail or a park and looked back, and you can't see a lot of detail. You could see the outlines of cars. You might see the outlines of people if you were really looking quite significantly, but you're not going to see necessarily people hovering around the car. So this is the one point at which all of what Rick says could be accurate, and he can also be it can also be exculpatory, because actually realistically Bridge Guy's already at the bridge by then, so he's not going to see those 2 cars parked at the farmer's entrance. So again, this is actually exculpatory. So this is the 3 key minutes in a bit more detail. I've plotted this out using the Hoosier Harvest Store footage timestamps to determine when Betsy Blair exactly would have got to Mears entrance and when Kelsey German would have been at Mears entrance. So with Betsy Blair, we know that the timestamp of 1:46 is as she's heading to the Mears entrance. With Kelsey German, we know the timestamp of 1:49 is when she's already left. So 30 seconds is the approximate distance between the Hoosier Harvest Store camera and the Mears entrance, meaning that Betsy Blair would arrive at about 1:46 and 50 seconds. Now, again, these are not exact. I can't tell you for sure, but that would be approximately, this is exact. This is the Hoosier Harvest Store footage timestamp. So we add about 30 seconds. We look at the Fitbit data. here, and I've explained this a little bit more in a longer video, but if you see the bars, so this is when she first arrives, the yellow one, it's hard to point to it. The yellow one here is when she first arrives at the trails at about a couple of minutes past 2:12, and you can see that this bar is only half the size of these bars. Now, these are 15-minute intervals, so this is 12 to 12:15, and she's only walking half as much as she is in these other intervals where she's walking on the trails, which suggests she spends a few minutes in the car because she's only walking for about 7 minutes. So if she arrived at 12:02 or 12:03, she would be walking for about 12 minutes. So it suggests she was doing some preps in the car perhaps before she actually got going. Was it putting on a jumper? If she's anything like me, I'm always doing my shoelaces because I just slip my shoes on. Was she getting headphones out if she was listening to music? I don't know, but there was some sort of preparation. Whereas this one here, this is a 1:45 to 2 interval. So again, this is when she's only just arrived at 1:46-ish, 1:47, and yet it's nearly a full bar, right? So it's a little bit less than this one, but it's still 75 to 80% of this. So to me, I said 10% shorter here because some of these are shorter as well. Like these are shorter. This one's particularly long. But this is not an exact science, but we can kind of make a kind of good estimation here that she pretty much got out of the car fairly immediately on this second occasion, whereas this one she lingered a bit. So let's say she's walking into the trail. She's at the trail split by about 1:47, 40 seconds. Kelsey pulls up around this period. She takes about 30 seconds to drop the girls, or a minute, because she has to have left the Mears entrance to get to that Hoosier Harvest or camera timestamp by 1:48 and 36 seconds. This is such a short time frame. It's literally this sort of 2-minute window. But what we do know is that Kelsey and Betsy Blair don't see each other. Betsy Blair doesn't mention Kelsey's car pulling up. Kelsey doesn't mention seeing Betsy Blair leaving her car. So the suggestion is that Betsy Blair's already out of her car and well up the kind of short trail to the trail split by the time Kelsey arrives. So you can see that if Rick got up from the bench, perhaps even triggered by hearing some rustling or a car arriving, he then gets up and turns. He sees the two cars, just glances at them and walks away. He wouldn't have necessarily seen Betsy Blair either, because Betsy would have potentially already been on the 501 towards Simone on High Bridge. He wouldn't have necessarily seen the girls out the car given the distance. He did say they could have been. He also does say there could have been people who walked behind the bench while he was sitting there. So this actually makes a lot of sense. It's very tight, yes. But then so are so many time frames in this case and many others. These are it's not a plan. It's not that someone's planned, well, within that 1 minute I'm going to get up. But this is very much something that could be very possible here. It's actually incredibly sad too, because Rick gets up and he goes the other way. If he had stayed longer, if he had been there slightly later, he potentially would have been on the bridge. And would that have meant that bridge guy did not abduct the girls? Would that have saved the girls? Would he have seen something happen? Who knows? But it's actually a time frame that's incredibly tragic, because it's tragic for the girls that there wasn't someone else on the trails at that time to save them, to abort the whole awful mission the bridge guy had that day. And it's also sad for Rick Allen, because he's on the trails close enough to be considered a suspect when he isn't. He isn't the offender. So that's my kind of brief explanation of my timeline. Why do I think that that's more plausible than the earlier timeline? As I mentioned earlier, it's because with the earlier timeline, we're expecting there to be so many more missed sightings of each other. With mine, the only real missed sighting is the 4 girls not noticing Rick. And again, when we look into more memory research, we'll see that that's actually not that unusual. And it kind of aligns with the research. So I'm going to stop there for now. The next video will be about the memory research that supports these points. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments. I'm happy to be debunked. I'm happy for you to let me know if there's other details or information that you think is missed in this or that needs to be considered. This timeline's evolved over time for me as well, as I've got to understand more of what's happened, read the testimony in more detail. So this is a series of videos. The live video that I did earlier today on September the 5th is or September the 4th in US time, is about the overall picture. It gives a lot more detail. This one is just about my alternate timeline and how it sounds plausible and exculpatory, and the next video will be going and deep diving into the memory research that supports my timeline, but also supports the reason why these witness statements are so unclear. And we're also going to compare Rick Allen to the sightings of Bridge Guy. Thanks, guys.